Welcome to True Crime Boss. I'm Jarrett Ferrantino. We're back in Idaho, and as we've said, we are going to cover the compelling pretrial motions in the Kohberger trial as they unfold. Right now, there is a motion to get the cameras out of the courtroom. Bryan Kohberger's attorneys have said the cameras, as they have been allowed in the courtroom, are focusing too much on their client, Bryan Kohberger. They're not following directives of the judge. They're risking creating a jury bias, and they're risking turning this case into a circus. That's the request that's been made. We're going to talk about why cameras have been allowed in certain courtrooms, why you don't see certain cases go on trial, and all that's ever shown are these drawings and renderings from artists inside the courtroom. I bet you never wondered why. We're going to talk about why. In the state of Idaho, it's important to note, up till right now, the Kohberger case has been televised, including the pretrial motions. Idaho allows cameras in the courtroom. Several states do not, including Pennsylvania, where I've been prosecuting most of my career. In Idaho, they're allowed. However, if a defense team or a prosecution makes a motion and asks the judge to remove the cameras, it's within that judge's purview to take the cameras out of the courtroom. Now, we've gone through the reasons as to why Kohberger's attorneys are asking to get the cameras out of the courtroom. In an unusual move, the prosecution has joined that request. They've said, we see that this runs the risk of becoming a circus. We don't necessarily desire to have this case tried in the press or with the media or on social media. We would rather keep the evidence and the witness presentations confined to the four walls of those courtrooms. So very rarely do you get a prosecution and a defense to agree. On this particular issue, they do. Now, that does not mean the judge is going to automatically grant that request. The families of our four beautiful victims, folks, have said they want cameras in the courtroom. They want the world to know what Kohberger is accused of and the savage crime that has befallen their children. And that will also weigh heavily on the judge in his consideration of whether or not cameras are going to be allowed. Now, folks, you may be wondering, what is the big deal if they film these trials? I'm going to tell you, we're in a situation where we're balancing rights. What are the fundamental rights of the taxpayers of the people of Idaho? What are the fundamental rights as you as taxpayers? Do you have the right to see cases as they unfold? As a taxpayer, is everyone doing their job? Is the DA doing his or her job? Are the public defenders doing their job? Is our government working? You certainly have a right to see those things play out. And folks, this is reality TV. I mean, this is reality TV on steroids. This is a murder trial that will play out in the press, no different than the O.J. Simpson trial, no different than Casey Anthony's trial. People are intrigued, interested, and educated by these trials playing out. So it is certainly reality TV on steroids. People have a curiosity. It's why shows like this exist. People are fascinated by true crime and the court system and the justice system. It is your right as a taxpayer, as a consumer, as a resident or citizen of this country to view these court trials as they play out. Also, folks, if people can see our system is working, will it show the world that the next Bryan Kohberger will have to pay for his crimes? Will it be a deterrent to people thinking about committing crimes? Would it encourage people to go into prosecution, into public defense? Will it encourage people to go into crime scene investigation? Everything about the O.J. Simpson case, for example, played out in the press. The particular witness of the week was a household name, quite honestly. Dr. Henry Lee, as I recall, or Cato Kalin. These were people when I was young and watching this trial. I'm still young, but younger watching this trial. I remember being fascinated by the presentation of each piece of evidence. And I was listening to Megyn Kelly and Mark Garagos and Marcia Clark, who was the prosecutor in the O.J. case, discuss the very motion we're talking about tonight. And Marcia Clark said something she'd never really said in any interview I've heard before. Ronald Goldman Sr., certainly the victim Ronald Goldman Jr.'s father, had said to Marcia Clark, they were discussing sometime after the trial about the impact the cameras may have had on the case. And Mr. Goldman said something to Marcia Clark. He said, if the cameras weren't there, the world would not have known all the evidence we had and that you put forth against O.J. Simpson. And that meant something to Marcia Clark. Like, she had proven her case to the world, and the world had seen how compelling the evidence was against O.J. Simpson, who in large part was convicted in the court of public opinion, but not to that jury. And I'm moved by what Mr. Goldman said, but then I wonder, what impact did that have on the jurors in that case? Because, folks, as important as it is to exercise your right as a taxpayer or as a curious reality TV on steroids viewer, you have to balance your rights against responsibilities and the rights of others. And do your rights to view your government in action circumvent the rights of Bryan Kohberger, whose right of a fair trial should be the paramount right in that courtroom? The families, the victims' families' rights that the system be balanced and fair. I think a lot of times the emotion that they're feeling may be coloring some of the positions they're taking, and that's understandable. But you have to balance those rights. The right to a jury to be fair and impartial and consider only the evidence inside that courtroom. So what do? Do we run the risk of this whole thing becoming a circus? Certainly the Murdaugh case played out on camera as well, and people were glued to it. Everyone becomes an expert, and they're arguing evidentiary rulings with me, and I enjoy that with people. I really enjoy the curiosities and the education these trials have. But I can't help but wonder, are lawyers mugging for the cameras? Some lawyers really like to be on camera. I don't know anybody like that, but will that impact the presentation that's done? Because as much as I enjoy doing this and being on camera, I have a job to present to a jury, not to the public at large. And there is no crowd or no viewer more important than the 12 people in that jury box. They need to be spoken with. They need to be convinced and presented to. And for me, as much as I would have loved to have some of the big cases and the triumphs in the courtroom play out on television, we've been successful because the people we were most concerned about presenting those cases to were sitting in that jury box. Another thing, folks, I've had many cases covered by the press, and there are reports. Traditionally, one of the arguments that get made for videoing and the cameras in the courtroom are some print reporters just don't get it right. I've read print reports. We have two local newspapers here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I've read reports from two reporters that were in the same courtroom for a proceeding that I was conducting, and it's like reading two different accounts of two different proceedings. And then there's the third version of what happened, mine. I was sitting there and I'm thinking, that's what these particular reporters got out of what was going on in court today? So there's the public's right to know. And you may say, we could have reporters in there reporting out every day. And the reality is, it may not be an accurate or total account of what's going on in that courtroom. I had a law professor who used to describe how reporters see the world, or how particular witnesses see a particular event, as three blindfolded individuals touching different parts of an elephant and asked to describe the elephant. And everybody's giving varying accounts. And at the end of the day, maybe if you combine their three accounts, you get a picture of an elephant emerging. Okay? But you got to tell the whole story. And sometimes we don't get the whole story by just a written account. That's another reason to have courtrooms with cameras and getting that information out to people. However, folks, again, we have 4 young lives that have been lost. And we have an entire different world than the world that prosecuted the O.J. Simpson case. We have social media. We have internet web sleuths out there. And this case, I would put money on it, has been investigated and has had other people tried and convicted, other than Bryan Kohberger, the Idaho case, than any case that's ever intrigued the internet before. This revealed the culture out there of people that examine these cases ad nauseum, and the social media presence that wasn't there for the OJ case. I'm just not sure where I come down on whether or not cameras should be in the courtroom. But my opinion is this: I always look for some kind of a balance or a resolution that could be made. And I say, if the judge is going to allow cameras in this courtroom, the judge should allow them in, but should install guardrails. And here's how those guardrails should be installed. If a witness is going to testify, start the cameras when that witness is on the bench or in the witness stand. If a witness is going to be directly examined and cross-examined, keep the camera going then. If there is a sidebar conversation, if there is an evidentiary dispute that gets delicate outside of the auspices of the jury. You see, folks, when things get really hot, sometimes the jury has to leave the room because there will be things said they cannot hear. And it happens often in cases. Often in cases with the size and the scope of the Kohberger case. That in those instances, the cameras should be shut off. There should be no risk that the jury would potentially be exposed by media or social media accounts for things that played out on camera they would typically not have seen. If the court commits to putting guardrails on what comes in or how the cameras are utilized, then I think it can be done fairly. And I think it could be managed. And I think you can balance the rights of people who want to see this trial play out versus the rights of the defendant and the families and the responsibilities of everyone involved to conduct a fair trial. You see, folks, when we have cases like this, in the O.J. Simpson case, and cases like the Murdaugh case, we have to think about the impact of decisions that they would have on their particular case. But then we have to think about the world going forward and think about how the decisions on high-profile, high-exposure cases like this set the table for what's to come. And this will be an example, hopefully a shining example of how to manage technology, social media, cameras, and still somehow manage to give a defendant a fair trial and keep a jury informed only on what is supposed to be presented to them and allowed to be presented to them in that courtroom. That's the paramount issue in this case. I hope it doesn't become a circus. I think the judge is leaning toward either not allowing cameras if I'm predicting what's going to happen here, or some kind of a hybrid approach like we've talked about today. And I think he'd be well advised to take the hybrid approach. We're going to continue to follow the Kohberger case as it plays out, and we're going to talk about these hot button issues as they play out. Whether it's on camera or not, we're going to keep you informed on these developments. Thank you.